I'm so excited that you've taken time out to tune in to the Ella Johnson Show. I hope that you enjoy the broadcast. I hope you'll laugh. I hope you'll cry. But I hope that you'll be moved by what you hear. Well, my guests are very special to me, and so are you. So I want you to sit back, enjoy the show. What you can become depends on what you can overcome. Yes, I'm so excited about my children's book that's coming out, and I'm looking for some mahogany kids. I'll tell you about that later. It's time for the Ella Johnson Show. Well, it is time for you to meet my friend Pete Earley. Pete Earley is a New York Times best-selling author. He's also the author of Circumstantial Evidence. Our guest also uses his journalistic background to take a fair-minded approach to the story while creating an alluring tale for the reader. With a 14-year career in journalism, Pete's opinion has been sought out on many topics, and as a result, he's been featured in media outlets like CNN, The Washington Post, NPR, and USA Today. Earley is widely known for his authentic and stylistic writing, and in 2008, he was listed as a member of the 100 most popular nonfiction authors. In addition to this award, Pete also, in 1996, won the Robert F. Kennedy Award for Social Justice. Because of his son, he's also an advocate for the mentally ill. Welcome to the Ella Johnson Show, Pete Earley. Hello, everyone out there. I saw you laughing there, Pete, when the clapping went on. Thought I would use my ability there.
I was going to say that I think my mother helped you write that introduction. It was so kind and gracious. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Actually, my assistant wrote it, so we'll give her kudos to that. But I want to welcome all of you to the Ella Johnson Show. This is a very special show. As you see, we have Pete Earley, author of Circumstantial Evidence, with us tonight. Welcome, Pete. Thank you so much for being my guest tonight. Listen, you are from Washington Post reporter to New York Times bestseller. And you've written books like The Hot House, Crazy, Family of Spies, Comrade J. But tonight we're bringing you on to talk about Circumstantial Evidence, Death, Life, and Justice in a Southern town. And that Southern town is our town, Monroeville, Alabama. And I'm excited that you won an Edgar Award for Circumstantial Evidence. And that's something that's given by the Mystery Writers of America for having the best fact crime book. So I am excited about that. And when he's not writing, he's advocating for mental health. Welcome again and again and again to the Ella Johnson Show.
Well, you're awfully nice having me. And the minute you invited me, I wanted to come on because this case um, occurred early in my career, but it has nagged me for decades. And I'm just outraged that it's never, ever really been resolved. I am thrilled. And, Bryan Stevenson is a good friend of mine, a man I deeply, deeply respect and admire. But the fact that Ronda Morrison's murder remains unsolved is just something the whole community should be upset about and want to resolve. And so I really appreciate you turning a spotlight on it now.
Well, I think that working together and having your feedback and all the information that you have really helps us be able to navigate through this. So I'm excited that you're excited about being a part of it. So, one thing I thought about too that I saw in your background was your sister Alice.
Right.
And I was just, we always have that soft spot, and we have that one thing that really drives us. Your sister was 17 years old and she was killed by a driver.
Correct.
And you actually did a piece in the Washington Post. You did an article what was the name of it? To Find a Sister. And tell us about that. I mean, I know that you were caught off guard with that, but I just think that is so beautiful. And you actually interviewed the woman who hit her.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it started because I was 14 at the time. And by the time I was 30, I found myself waking up having dreams about her. And I really realized that I'd repressed all my memories about her because it was just so hurtful to lose her, especially to my parents. They couldn't talk about her up until their deaths without bursting into tears. So we'd really kept it on the down low. No one ever talked about it. And a good friend of mine at the Washington Post, who later played a role in getting Circumstantial Evidence started, said, why don't you go back and investigate it? So I went back to Fowler, this small town in Colorado, 1,200 people in a rural area where my sister had died, and I actually investigated the case. I went back, I talked to the sheriff, and I tracked down the woman who had been in the car accident. And I was shocked because it was an intersection, blind intersection. She went shooting through the intersection. My sister was on a little motor scooter that I owned. She got hit, and it was a nightmare after that. The mortuary ran the ambulance service. They ran out of gas, taking her to a hospital. They got to the hospital, and this happened in the 60s before we knew about the golden hour, which is you have an hour before shock sets in, and that's what she died from. My father was there. He watched him trying to say, it was just horrific. But I was shocked because you want to talk about your show in two sides. When I tracked down this woman and talked to her, she was angry. She was angry at my family because she felt that we had persecuted her. My father had sued the insurance company. There's a long story behind that. And she felt like we were in the wrong and blaming her. So it was an interesting being part of a story and then having to back up and write about it is very, very difficult.
I'm sure.
The larger theme of that story was why do bad things happen to good people? And that's something we all struggle with. So
absolutely.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Well, we'll dedicate tonight's show to her memory. How about that? Yeah. Well, I want to talk about circumstantial evidence. Right. I know it's been a while since you wrote this book.
Yeah.
But so I'll help you. If you just forget something, just holler at me.
Okay.
I'll remind you. Yeah. Because I have a lot of people watching the broadcast who have read this story and they're intrigued by what you have to say with, how things were in the background with this. Now, back in November 1st, 1986, what we're going to do, Pete, is we're going to break down this show into like 3 sections. We're going to talk about the characters first. Then we'll talk about the legal side of things. And then we'll kind of talk about what should we take from this and a plan of action. How about that?
Sounds great. I hope I can answer those questions.
I'm sure you can. Now, the first one, Ronda Morrison. This is obviously the first character. She's 18 years old. And I know that pulls at your heartstrings because your sister was 17.
Right.
And beautiful young lady. She was going to the junior college in Monroeville, and she's dead. What is it? I'm curious to know, what is it about this story that sent you to Monroe, that got you interested in this in the first place?
Thanks for asking that. Well, the book I had done before that was called The Hot House, and I had spent a year off and on inside a maximum security penitentiary. It was the first time the federal government ever allowed a reporter just to roam around. And I'd go out for 23 days. Everyone knew I was a reporter. I could talk to anyone who'd talk to me. I had to sign a release if I was, taken hostage, murdered, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And I'd go out for 23 days. Then for my own mental stability, I'd get out of there for 23 days because it was such a horrific place. But I went in thinking, I'm going to find somebody innocent. And it was curious because the inmates all claimed, well, I'm innocent of the crime that got me here, but, I have done bad things. But anyway, they all said, if you want to find an innocent person, go to death row. That's where the most innocent people are. And I was shocked. A buddy of mine, Walt Harrington, had written a story about Bryan Stevenson. This is before he was famous. And he said, call up Bryan. If I wanted to do something on the death penalty, call up Bryan. And he talked to him. I called him up and he said, I have an innocent man on death row right now. And if you come down here to Alabama, you can write about it. And I said, well, look, I'm a reporter. I'm just like you. Now, I said, if I find out he's guilty, I'm going to write that. I'm not going to come down and do a piece to please you. He said, calm down. So for 3 years, I was down there with him. I watched the whole thing unfold. Of course, he's done his book now, Just Mercy. Great movie, great book. But what I wanted to do was show how it's so complicated to solve a murder in a small town. And I wanted to begin with the murder and then every possible person who was accused or was rumored about or whatever, and show how it all unfolded. And in doing that and following this case, what ended up was a larger story about how racial prejudice, political influence, greed, power, politics, all factored into this case involving Johnny D. McMillian, who ultimately was, as you know, freed from death row.
Right, right. So basically, you just wanted a true story. Now, did you ever visit? Did you actually go to Monroeville, though?
Oh, yeah, no. I went down there. I interviewed all the major players. I went down there.
Wow.
I think I went down there, I don't know, 10, 15 times over a 3-year period, which was how long it was taking to kind of unfold. But it was interesting because in prison, it was difficult for me to get black inmates to really talk to me frankly. I discovered when I went to Monroeville that the black residents and Minnie McMillian, who I just thought was a tremendous lady, all accepted me immediately. The advantage then, too, was all the whites accepted me because they felt like I was coming down here. They felt like Bryan Stevenson was a rebel rouser causing problems. So, I mean, I was welcomed by Sheriff Tate and Tommy Chapman and Eichner and even Benson, the three major players, in this case. And I had, the whole community was open to me, which was something I hadn't felt when I was in prison, which was such a racist environment. So it was interesting to me to go from Minnie McMillian's house right there on the highway and listen to her and her stories, and then drive into the Monroeville courthouse and go in and sit down and talk to Sheriff Tate and hear his point of view, and then talk to the Morrison family. Initially, they were very reluctant, didn't want anything to do with me. Eventually, they granted me a few interviews, but they were convinced at the beginning that I was probably brought in by Bryan Stevenson to stir things up. So it was just an amazing story that really needed to be told.
Yes. Now it's interesting you say the Morrisons were reluctant to talk to you, because they're just trying to find who killed their daughter, right?
They
So,
had, they'd been convinced early on that McMillian had done it.
right,
And they, prosecutors and investigators form a very important relationship with victims. And the victims feel obligated to, it's kind of a two-way street. And if you ask any questions of them that raise questions about Johnny D, and this progressed, I mean, it became clearer and clearer as Bryan Stevenson unfolded this onion that Johnny D was innocent. And what's so fascinating about this case is, if you looked at this case as an outsider and knew nothing, you'd go, "Oh my God, this guy's so guilty." I mean, you have two witnesses that say they saw his truck and saw him at the cleaners. You have an eyewitness who says he went in and saw the dead body. And you have all these other people saying, "Oh yeah, he did it, he did." And an eyewitness who's Ralph Myers, who's saying, "Oh yeah, Johnny D did it. This is why." And it seemed like, wow, this is a case where no one should ever appeal it. This guy murdered Ronda Morrison. He should be put to death. And then you got into it. And you found out, oh, wow, what was beneath the surface was so much. And, he was innocent. I know there are people in Monroeville today who still insist Johnny D is guilty. He was not. He is not. The evidence doesn't show he was. And I'm sorry, people still believe that. I think most hypocritical things, this is kind of a sign of the times. I like Tommy Chapman. I liked him as a person. Doesn't mean I agree with his views. But I remember I watched the 60 Minutes interview with him. And he was horrified at how he looked. And then at one point he said to me, "Well, if Johnny D didn't do this, he needs to be in jail anyway because he sure did something." And so it was, it was kind of an eye-opening, experience. It's like, what?
I don't think it's changed much. I really don't. I think maybe the players changed, but I don't think the mindset has. Now, okay, so let's go back to November 1st, sure. 1986. One of the players there, Ronda Morrison.
Right.
Now, I read your book and I saw that she and her friend Lisa Odom,
right,
they didn't feel comfortable around blacks based on your book.
I think that I don't think that was unusual for young girls at that time period in Monroeville who were going to a separate school. And the town itself was racially divided. I remember.
Definitely.
I can't remember which is which, but there were like two fast food joints, like a Burger King and a McDonald's. And if you went into one when you were black, you were accepted, but not at the. I mean, I remember people saying that this isn't your place to eat or something. I mean, this was in the 80s. I mean, there's a lot going on there. But they had gone to the white segregated school, and they were young. They didn't have a whole lot of interactions with blacks, and they were intimidated by them. They were scared of them, I think, because of what they had been told and seen.
Right.
They didn't have any action with them. Early on, Lisa Odom talks about how a young black man had come in the cleaners and she'd felt threatened just by his presence there. And this became important because there was a gun that was the cleaners.
Yes.
And so that later plays an effect. But, these were two, kind of young, Rhonda was very religious family. Her family, very religious, innocent, not very worldly young ladies. And, that's who was working there, and very joyous. What can I say? That's who it was.
When you say that, you have friends in Monroeville who still believe Johnny D did it. That was the thing that got me started with this petition, because I felt that in my spirit. I said, I don't think that they have let this go. As far as it didn't matter that he got out, he was exonerated. It didn't matter. I still felt that, and so. It hurts to hear you say that, but I knew it. I kind of knew it. I felt it. And I don't know what it's going to take other than having the rightful killer brought to justice. And I'm glad you agree.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. Well, Johnny D, now this isn't mentioned very often, but he was known to sell weed on occasion. And he was known in the teenage community as someone who, if he had weed, he'd sell it to them. Now, it was a big thing in the 80s. That's, a lot of states have legalized it now. But I think one of the reasons he was targeted, and of course you can never prove this, is he was having a sexual affair with a white woman.
Absolutely.
And that immediately got attention. And, that was something that was not, she was married, he was married. So they were breaking all kinds of taboos.
Yeah. And, since we're jumping over to her, Karen.
Karen Kelly.
Yeah, Karen Kelly. Her background was that her dad was a KKK member.
Yeah.
And in your book, you brought out how she would wear the KKK suit around the house, and they totally did not like the N-word. They totally did not like them. So she grew up around that. And you even described her first encounter with Johnny D. Yeah. How she was like, she wiped it off and he kissed her on the lips. And she didn't see herself, and he didn't see himself being with a white woman either. But I think they got into it. And I noticed that Minnie talked about her first encounter with Karen when she came and showed up at the house trying to buy some marijuana.
Yeah.
And I thought it was very interesting because this is something that the Black community says sometimes. In the book, you talked about how Minnie told him that white woman is going to get you in a world of trouble, Yeah,
and, I'm not an expert on male-female relations, but I really liked Minnie. I felt she'd been dealt a really rough hand. She was like a lot of women her age who I've met who are minorities. She's very reserved. She didn't want to volunteer a lot of information at first, but she had a really rough upbringing. And I think she felt obligated to stay with Johnny D. And she did, even though she knew he was catting around on her. And I think she felt like, especially after he's falsely accused, I think she had been we're jumping ahead, but
I know we are. We're all over the place, but it's okay.
But
it's okay.
Maybe let's go back to the beginning and how they messed up the crime scene from the beginning.
Oh.
Yeah. So what happens is she's found dead, and the local authorities mess up the crime scene. They let people wander all through it. People are marching through there.
Yeah.
And they get nowhere. I think it's like for 6 months. There's a Cuban family that they think may have done it, and then they go through Randy Jackson, if I remember correctly, who owned the clinic.
Randy Thomas,
Miles Jackson,
and Miles Jackson, and Randy Thomas.
Randy Thomas. And they think it's a drug deal, and they go through that. And of course, I remember interviewing both of them. And Miles Jackson is horrified. He grew up in that town, and all that. And eventually, they don't have anyone that and to really link it to. And what's interesting about that is when Eichner and Tate and Benson really get involved. Larry, Simon Benson, and Thomas Tate. And that's when it really turns to attention on Johnny D.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that. But, I want to go back to the cleaners, the owner of the cleaners, right. Miles Jackson, because he lied and said that, no, I've been up here for about 2 weeks. And in your book, you talk about how it was common for him to go there because he was still getting his clothes cleaned. Even though he wasn't the owner anymore, he was still getting his clothes cleaned at the cleaners. But he lied to the police and said that it was like 2 weeks that he'd been there. But he went and told Randy Thomas, the new owner, hey, I was the last one to see her alive.
Right.
So he was like, really? Did you tell the police that? So Randy goes and tells the cops, did you know this? And so when they brought him back, they should have had no mercy with him. Why did you lie? What are you hiding? And I think they were onto him for a minute. But I think what happened is he went and he got his own lie detector test done. And that kind of took them off of him no, not him. No, Howard Denmark did his own. Yeah.
Well, they gave him a lie detector. They gave. They went after him. They went over Randy Thomas. Thomas had an alibi. He was, I think, at his parents' house out of town. But they eventually found those didn't go anywhere. And I don't know how much more you want to dwell on that, but there was tremendous pressure. What's interesting about this book so much, what interests me and what is missed in Just Mercy, or most telling of this, is that the way they get to Johnny D is through the murder of a white girl in a different county. But she is considered white trash. Now, that's the police name for it. And so it was very easy to kind of shift the characters in that, who were Karen Kelly and Ralph Myers, and they all of a sudden become the conduit to get to Johnny D.
Now, when you brought in the second murder,
right,
like, that changed the game.
Yeah,
because now we're not looking at one murder, but we're looking at two murders. And what I found interesting, Pete, was you talked about Johnny D was actually charged with three things. He was charged with sodomy. He was charged with 2 murders. Okay. I could not believe that in your book, you talked about how the Monroe Journal actually did an article saying that they had overwhelming evidence on the sodomy charge. There was nothing but Ralph Myers saying, yeah, he did it. And they coerced him to do that.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting, because what happens is Vicki Lynn Pittman gets murdered, and her father is a suspect, and Karen Kelly's a suspect, and Ralph Myers appears in it. And then there was Tyrone Patterson, another guy.
Yes.
And they all end up telling different stories, and it's Karen Kelly's boyfriend who supposedly committed this murder. But what's interesting is that they pick up Ralph Myers and they drive him by the cleaners.
Yes, I saw that. And they said, well, he recognized it, so it must be true.
Yeah.
Are you serious?
Saying, are you seeing this? And all of that kind of stuff. And, he snaps to this, that's a good way for him to get out of the other charges. And so he
played them. Played them.
Well,
yeah.
Ralph Myers, who I think is out of prison now, had a rough life. He has learning disabilities. He's got some mental problems. And he was very easily led. He's the kind of guy who the last person who talked to him was, he wants to please him, and he's gonna tell him that story. Now, I want to kind of throw something in here. I know we're jumping all around, but the theory that Eichner, Tate, and Benson had was that a guy comes in to rob the place. He forces Rhonda back into the bathroom. They get into a struggle. Her gold necklace is torn off. Her blouse is ripped open. Her bra gets pushed up during this struggle. She runs for the door. He shoots her in the bathroom. Then he shoots her in the back. She collapses in the front lobby. Myers comes in, who's with him, sees the body there, and then it's dragged to the back and hidden under these clothes. Well, what's interesting about that is none of it makes sense, and none of it makes sense. Absolutely, we get in that later. But what Johnny D is named as the person who did it. 2 things happen. Sam Crook becomes an outspoken defender of Johnny D, which is interesting because Sam Crook raises a Confederate flag every day. And I don't know if you've ever been out to his house, but he built 2 houses, one for his wife, one for him. And he wanted to be buried with his horse. I mean, this guy but he was defending Johnny D. And
he was the only one who defended Johnny D, actually.
And the other thing is that Howard Denmar, who's a pseudonym I use, shows up and he starts contacting the police and talking about how he saw a black man running from the cleaners. He inserts himself in the story. Now, this becomes very important later on. But if we want to stop there and see where you're going with it next, legally, I will keep my mouth shut because I jump all over.
No, it's okay. I have my notes, but we're just gonna roll with it. Now, I like what Denisha said because that was interesting, and there's just so much from the book. And what I thought was odd in that first trial with Bryant and what were the attorneys that represented Johnny D in that first trial, but they did not capitalize on the fact that Ralph Myers got on the stand and said that the body was in the lobby. And they know that based on other testimony that the body was found face down. And they didn't catch that in the trial.
No, what happened is he's put on trial. He has the two really prominent black attorneys defend him. They do a horrible job.
Yeah.
He's convicted. Then Bryan picks it up on appeal. So on an appeal, you have to, he really initially didn't launch a separate investigation. He had to work with what the court said. And it was only later that it became clear, even when we were doing the 60 Minutes thing, that it didn't make sense. That the body, Myers kept saying that, and you have to understand, Bryan and his people were looking at Bill Hooks. Bill Hooks was the black man who came by and said that he'd seen the truck there. They were looking at, let me think for a second what the other guy's name was. There was a white guy who also claimed some of the reward, who said he had also driven by the
Hightower.
Yeah,
Hightower.
Hightower.
Yeah,
he had seen either seen the truck or seen someone there, and they were focusing more on. They got excited when they realized that the truck had been converted into a lowrider and it wasn't anything like that. So I think they were trying to pick that apart. But yes, they didn't pick up that right at first. It was only when we got to the 60 Minutes thing.
Now, Pete, when you talked about Johnny D when he got arrested, everything in that whole section was just unbelievable. He was picked up. They had to use a guise to get him. And that's why the sodomy charge was what they used. Because when they stopped Johnny D, and he's like, what are you charging me for? What is it? What did I do? And they said sodomy. He didn't even know what it was. He was like, sodo what?
That's correct.
And
that's very intentional, though, because imagery is so important. If you look at the mugshot of Johnny D, he is thrown up there, and he has his afro, and it's kind of tousled, and he seems to be, for a white person, and then you throw sodomy in, it generates all those fears. Here's a black man, he's already sleeping with white women, and he's committed. I mean, it plays on all the racial stereotypes and the racial fears. And I think that was, intentional. I mean,
so you think that was by design? I didn't look at it that way.
Yeah.
But I did. You gave me something to think about when we were talking about these three investigators. Okay, you had Simon Benson, who was from ABI. You have Eichner, and then you have Tate.
Right.
And I read a part in there where you talked about how Benson was. I did not realize that Simon Benson was infiltrating Black civil rights groups in Monroe County. Yeah. I had no idea of that until I read your book. Yeah. Because for those of you that are watching this broadcast, what that means is that he was going into these groups posing as if he was a part of it, but he was reporting back to the police everything they were doing. Now, how do you think that the white people in Monroe looked at this, that you have a black man who is putting away another black man and he's using black men to do it? Do you think that made them feel good? Do you think that empowered them at all? I mean, how do you think that played into everything?
I don't think it played, this may sound strange, but I don't think it played that big of a role because they were used to, I mean, the number of black officers wasn't huge in that, but they viewed him more as a lawman than a black man. Although I know many and others felt that he was lying, and yeah, they did feel betrayed about that. The thing about Simon Benson was he was very quiet around me. He saw himself as a lawman, but he was much more comfortable dealing with his peers in the white community, I believe. I think because of his background and because he was in law enforcement, he didn't feel as comfortable. I don't know him that well, but I didn't sense that he knew what his role was. His role was to be the black officer who went in the black community and found out what he needed to know. And,
But that was very common back in those days because,
right.
I mean, the guy who infiltrated the Black Panthers was a black man.
Yeah.
Michael O'Neill. So
yeah. I can't
William O'Neill, I mean.
I can't tell you how the black community felt about him. I think that they were more upset.
They called him Uncle Tom based on some of the things I saw in your book.
Right.
Yeah.
I think when Johnny D was first charged, I think there was a feeling that this is all just a big error. It's a mistake. And the main reason
that's what he thought too.
Well, the main reason was that there was a fish fry that day, and Johnny D had been there working on his truck. And it wasn't like 2 or 3 people had been there. There had been a number of people at this fish fry who had seen him. And not until later do we find out one of the people who, when they actually started really investigating this case, they discovered that one of the persons at the fish fry said 2 FBI agents came by and stopped at the fish fry because they were investigating a crime. Nobody ever looked at that. And then they find out that eventually, way at the end of this thing, when they're scrambling to try to figure out how to keep Johnny D in jail and prison on death row, even though there's mounting evidence, they discover it was 2 ABI officers who had stopped there.
Yes.
And they never talked to anybody about it. Now, what's really outrageous about this is when they're investigating it, they have these 2 ABI officers who are in this room with all the investigators, and Chapman's there, everybody's there. And they go, oh, that was us. We stopped there. And you know what? They hid it. They didn't want to tell Bryan Stevenson. So they kept it hidden. Now
they kept a lot hidden.
They knew at that point that, that was it. That it was just another bit of evidence. But I'm jumping ahead. But I think they felt like the fish fry, everybody there. And I think one of the saddest and most demeaning things was when Johnny D was put on trial, they had witnesses come in and say he was there, he was there, he was there. And they were immediately dismissed by jurors as, oh, they're relatives, they're family. They're just going to say that. And you have to wonder how race played into that.
Oh, definitely.
So
but you went a little further on that part too, though, because you got some of the feedback from one of the jurors. Right. And they looked at that as if, of course he's going to lie. But I think what hurt in that trial, and I know she was just talking because, we tend to talk a lot when we're nervous. I know I would if I was sitting there trying to defend my husband. But they tried to say that when Minnie made the comment about, well, he comes, I know he was here because he comes on the 1st of every month. When in fact, the receipt showed October 31st as the day that he came. Even though he really did come on the 1st, they couldn't prove it. And that's what was the conflict with that part and, them deciding that, it was just so many things in that first trial. But I thought, I have a question here. I left this here because Les is actually the person who told me about circumstantial evidence. So thank you, Les.
Yeah,
he's here.
Kind of jumping around here, but
I know. We're just having a good time, though. Les says, does Pete believe this case can be solved?
Oh, absolutely. I absolutely. I think it not only can be solved, I think it should be solved. And, that for those who have read the book, Johnny D is eventually proven innocent. And they don't want to let him off death row. They know he's innocent. I had a member of your state attorney general say, if you think I'm going to take a black man off death row who's accused of killing a white woman, and I don't have another black man to put in there, you're nuts. And that was just common language. They bring in 2 ABI investigators. These are the best in the state. And they start at the very beginning. They go out and they talk to Miles Jackson. They give him a polygraph test. They talk to Randy Thomas. They talk to the Cubans that were there. Then they go and they talk to all of the witnesses. And they're the ones who also look at how Ronda's body, they get evidence that shows that Ronda died where she was. She did not die in the lobby. And they, after they look at all of this, and they also consult the, the FBI, whatever. I can't think of the name of the teams. The forensic guys who predict whatever. Sorry about that. They come up with a whole different theory of the case. In their case this is somebody had a fixation on Ronda, that they'd been watching Ronda, that they came in the cleaners, they ended up going back to the bathroom where he tried to sexually attack her, that you have to look at, there were 3 gunshots, and one of them was right through here, and that would have been when she was trying to escape, and she ran out and he shot her in the back. And their whole theory was that he pulled a gun, a .25 caliber on her, took her to the bathroom to rape her. She went along. One of the things they discovered that was crucial was her blouse had not been ripped open. There was no
exactly.
The buttons had been unbuttoned. And their theory was that she'd gone along, unbuttoned her blouse, he'd pushed her bra up, felt her up, then told her to undo her pants. And at that point, it was too much, and they struggled. They found her makeup on the side of the door. Nobody had ever seen that before. Mm-hmm. And then when she ran, they shot her. That was their theory. And so that was completely different than the theory that was used to convict him and the false witnesses. I mean, they proved that Ralph Myers lied. They proved that Karen Kelly lied. They proved that Bill Hooks, he recanted.
All of them lied.
All of them did. All of this perfect case just vanished once people looked at it. So then they set out to find out who this person could have been. This is where it gets interesting to me because of the Howard Denmark character. And so he's an insurance agent who has an office across the street. And they could see into the cleaners. And he initially went to the police and said, I saw a black guy running out. And then he started getting possessed by the case. At one point, he went to everyone who was investigating it saying, oh, you should look at this. You should look at that. And he went to the Morrisons themselves. And at one point, Charles Morrison became so concerned, he said, did you kill my daughter? Mm-hmm. Now, there were 2 people who worked in this office. And he blamed the other guy, other guy in there. He said he's the one who did it. He said he had pornography hidden in the bathroom, and that he would, be obsessed with Ronda. And so he tried to pin the blame on this other guy.
Right. Kramer, I think it was. I think his name is Kramer.
Yep.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Kurt Kramer. And they tracked him down. They gave him a polygraph. He had an alibi. And he said, wait. What he's telling you
is him.
It's him. So they go back to find this guy. And he's gotten out of the insurance business. And he's living in a trailer. And it has rows of fencing and barbed wire around it. And he's become a recluse. And I ended up interviewing him several times. And he says, I'm an alcoholic. Ever since this murder, I've become an alcoholic. I've had a mental breakdown. And, my life is just gone downhill. He only would come out and have dinner with his mother. So they zero in on him. Now, this is very interesting because when they zero in on him, they find out that this fellow had been prosecuted for distributing naked pictures of a girlfriend who he'd broken up with. And I ended up interviewing her. She'd been coming out of the shower when they were dating. He took some pictures of her. They'd had this ugly breakup. And he had put them on a circular, sent them to the school where her kids were, sent them to her employer. And Tommy Chapman had prosecuted him. Now, again, you see how this all ties together? Chapman knew about this guy.
Yes.
Gone to these folks and said, you know, you're looking at the wrong guy. You should look at this guy and everything. So it's kind of interesting because he ended up contacting me. He ended up contacting Bryan Stevenson and talking to everyone. And Stevenson said, you need to get yourself an attorney. I'll never forget, he came to see me at the motel there. He walked in, opened his briefcase, took out an ashtray, and smoked. He was a chain smoker. And he then took all the ashes in the tray with him because I guess he thought I was going to get his fingerprints. But this fellow spent hours and hours. The first time they interviewed him, he spent 7 hours there. And they said to him, how do you think it happened? Now, this is one of the most interesting parts of the section of the book. The lead up, Johnny D, all that is fascinating. That's the main story. But Bryan was not in the business of trying to find the killer. He was in the business of getting Johnny D off.
Right.
And he moved on to his next case. And I respect that.
Right.
So these guys interviewing for 7 hours, and they say, what do you think happened? He said, well, he thought this other guy, what was his name, Kramer. Yeah. He had a fixation for this. And he used to watch through binoculars Ronda at the clerk. He watched her one day when she'd leave and go. He said she started getting phone calls, okay, at the cleaners by a mysterious voice. And the voice would say, how are you doing? They weren't obscene. And he made it very clear in his interviews with the agents. These were not obscene calls. They were just, someday we should get together and blah, blah, blah. And it was just flirtation back and forth. So then what happened is, this is what he says, the guy probably walked in to get his clothes or something, and Ronda snapped to, that's the voice. That's the guy who's been calling me. At that point, Demar's theory was the guy panicked, and pulled a gun, forced her to go back to the bathroom. Now, in his own mind, he may have thought she wanted to have sex. But at that point, he told her, to undress, unrobe, and then again pushed up the bra and escaped and ran. Totally different than what Eichner and Benson and Tate did, which was a robbery. They said early on this is a sex crime. And he described it, and when he left them, they turned to each other and said, man, he did it. He just told us he did it.
Exactly what happened.
Exactly what happened. So then they keep interviewing him, and they decide at one point they're going to tell him not to come. They're going to say, we're done with you. They're wondering what will happen because he's contacted me, Bryan, he's contacted all authorities. What will happen if we tell him we don't want to talk to him anymore? And he stuck around. He stayed. They finally threw him out of the office. Then at that point, he gets an attorney. And that attorney is a very aggressive, good attorney. I mean, he called me and threatened me with, a suit if I put anything in there. It's kind of interesting. If you read the quote in the book, it's kind of interesting because one of the other things, a profiler. They sent the pictures to a profiler, and he came back and said it's a white male. He had a fight that morning. He'd probably been stalking her. He'd probably been abusive to women. He probably either had a sexual attack or assault or something. And the agents said, oh, that's him. That's fits
to a T.
Yeah. Well, what's funny about the quote is the attorney called me up, and he said, you realize if you've been talking to these women, because a couple of women came forward and said that Denmark had sexually assaulted them. But they were afraid to testify. They wouldn't testify. And the attorney called me up and he said, if you put that stuff in the book, what these whores are saying, you're going to be held for libel. Well, I mean, he made it news because he said, if you put what these women say, he called them whores say, it's not true. But anyway, he then put on a really good kind of preemptive strike. And he basically told Chapman, you go in there and try to prosecute him, and I'm going to fight you tongue in cheek. So by the time that Cole and Taylor, who are the two ABI agents, they're convinced they really want Chapman to file charges against Demar, and Chapman just won't do it. He said, look, the town's been through enough. It's circumstantial. I'm not going to go through all of this again. And quite frankly, I think it was just a matter of he didn't want to take on the fight. Pate had turned against him. Taylor had turned against him. They were both saying, see, what happens is this case is going nowhere. Johnny D, Bryan Stevenson is proving left and right legally that Johnny D couldn't have done it. But nobody was going to do anything until 60 Minutes came in.
Absolutely.
They brought in 60 Minutes, and then I was there with Tommy, and he was horrified. Then the ABI sends in these two guys. They all get in a room, and then he's hearing all this evidence. No one ever polygraphed Kelly, Kelly, Myers, Hightower, or Hooks. Never did any investigation. So he's beginning to see all this, and he's going, oh my gosh, this guy probably is innocent. And he realizes how bad he looked on 60 Minutes. You ever watch the 60 Minutes film? Chapman comes across as really cold-blooded. So Chapman then, has to decide he balks. He's not going to do it. And so Taylor and Cole are told to leave town, and the case just dies. And it's never been. So
you're telling me then that they had an opportunity to pursue what ABI, Taylor and Cole was saying, but he said no.
Chapman
where were the Morrisons at this point? What were they thinking? Where did they fit into any of this in that decision making?
I don't know, because after my book came out, they kind of they were always very suspicious of me, and they just talked briefly. After the book came out, he called me and said, "You're the man. You're good, and we need to find out." And I know that Sam Crook and other people there had gone to him and told him about this Damar character. And but I don't know. After I did this book, you do a book like this, you're going to have half the people think it's great, half people think it's awful. They're going to think, they're going to believe what they want to believe.
True.
And so I moved on. I
was going to ask you, how do you think the Morrisons, what did they think about your book?
Well, he told me that he really appreciated it when it came out. But he also, he told me Sheriff Tate had told him that Johnny D was guilty. He told me that Larry Eichner was telling him Johnny D was guilty. And, there's a scene in the book there, Chapman calls Eichner in and says, our policy is he's innocent, and if you don't want to abide by that, you're fired. And so, but you also understand the community itself turned on Chapman. I know he got reelected, but there was a lot of, and I think he lost his friendship with Tate over this. They were not close after that I know.
Yeah, that ripped him apart. Yeah,
you'll know more about it being from Monroeville than I will, because after I did the book, Bryan and I did a few things together, in celebration of Johnny D. I won an award. Bryan flew up for that, but I moved on. And occasionally I'd get letters, mostly from Lisa and other people who'd known Ronda, saying, this is outrageous. Everyone knows who did it. The whole town's talking about it. I think the DeMar character ended up leaving town. I don't know if he was driven out or not, but it just kind of just went away.
So you yourself, you were getting a lot of feedback from people in Monroeville saying, we know who did it. So everybody in Monroeville, so what will it take now? Because I saw that Les said, what about forensics? You say that we can solve this. What is it going to take for us, and where should we start working to try to make this thing happen?
Well, I'd contact the 2 ABI agents if they're still alive. Okay, so Chapman asked the very same question. They came to him and said, look, we have this profile. It fits Denmark. We know that he tried to blame the other guy. He's come and given us all these tapes where he talks about, walks you right up to the edge, but doesn't, admit it. And Chapman looks at it and says, well, it's all circumstantial. So they go back and they say the only possible way to prove this without a confession is there was one drop of blood found that didn't match Ronda's, found in the cleaners. And they said, if we could match that drop of blood to DNA of the killer, then we'd know, for sure what it was. And
so how did the killer have blood? He didn't get shot. So what was he bleeding?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know where this blood came from. I don't know if he got scratched or I don't know. I just know that there was a drop of blood that was unaccounted for. And so they thought that if you're jogging my memory, they found a drop of blood. They didn't know whose it was. They thought if they could match it to Denmark, they could prove it was him. And by that time, he'd gotten an attorney, and I don't think they were able to take that next step.
Didn't he fail the polygraph initially?
Well, that's a big controversy. So what happened was they gave him a polygraph, and they came back and said to him, you lied, you did the murder. And he didn't buy it. He said, no, I did not. Yeah, I did not. I did not fail that polygraph. So then they give him a second one at some point, and they say, oh, it shows you're inconclusive. And he says, no, I did not. He was adamant from day one he was innocent. And his attorney believed he was innocent and argued he was innocent and said, look, this guy has mental problems. I mean, he admits in the book to me that he needs psychiatric counseling. He's an alcoholic. He's depressed. He's lost his business. For some reason, he's totally taken over by this case. And, the attorney said, you have no evidence that but, it's quite possible that, he is innocent and that he just saw this. He became obsessed with it. He wanted to get involved in it. He has mental problems.
All over it.
Yeah. And so, but I also think Chapman knew that this person was from a well-respected family and a white family. And I think that also the town had just suffered this awful embarrassment, cruelty. I mean, people were outraged by the 60 Minutes because it painted the whole town as being racist and framing Johnny D. And,
which is true.
The community looked really, really badly. And so I just think he didn't want to get into it. He didn't want to base another career on it. It was too much of too personal. And I just think that's why I think now is one of the only chances to get back in it. Now, I've tried to get 2020. I tried to get 60 Minutes to return, and I just haven't been able to get any of them. And part of it is because no one was ever charged. And if you notice on 2020 in those shows, usually the person's convicted or found innocent, and they just don't want to go down unless they know that this person's guilty.
It's got some meat, yeah. Do you think that it will help this cause if Mrs. Morrison is on board? And do you think she will?
Absolutely. Well, I haven't spoken to her in a long time now. I did hear from a relative who said that she had Mrs. Morrison had loaned my book to someone and not gotten it back and wanted another copy, so I mailed it down. So I assume that I can't, you talked about my sister. My folks were devastated by her death. I had not seen that kind of devastation until I saw Charles Morrison. Ronda, the light of his life. She was the only child, a miracle baby. They loved her, at his future, and they both were extremely religious people. I went to one of their church services, and I mean, they were devout believers. I can't help but think, but I think that that family has been tortured too. I mean, when you have people showing up saying, I mean, Damar went over there and he said that Ronda had been seen sunbathing topless in their backyard. And that, you know, that's part, I mean, just awful stuff about their daughter. And I mean, this whole thing, I mean, Miles Jackson's reputation was ruined. The young new owner, the cleaners, I doubt if he still owns it. I don't even know if it's still in business. I mean, you know, everybody was on drugs. I mean, everybody was suspicious. It's just been an awful, awful situation.
So let's talk about the legal side of things. Let's move to that, and where it just, because you have Johnny D now, he's charged with sodomy and 2 murders. And there was some things that, like, when they had him in the jail, I think at the courthouse, they took, and Benson was the one that was kind of him, and I think it was him and Tate and Eichner. I think they were all interviewing all 3 of them back to back.
Right.
And what I thought was odd is Bill Hooks, when they brought him to the jail, or when he showed up at the jail, they allowed him to look at Johnny D's truck because they had brought Johnny D's truck to the police station.
Right.
And so where they messed up is Johnny D. I mean, is that Bill Hooks is out here saying, yes, I know it was his because it was down to the ground. What they didn't know is that it wasn't that day.
Yeah. He'd had that done after it had been done after the murder, which showed Bill Hooks. And, you know, Bill Hooks recanted, backed up, and just kind of, I don't know where it happened to him, but he was not one who wanted to be interviewed. I think
you could tell that in the 60 Minutes interview. He was just like, if that's what I said, that's what I said.
Yeah,
right? He was very defensive.
He got the money, and that was what was counted.
Because it was like $18,000, I think it was, the reward money. It came because they were having they were having all kinds of fundraising events to raise money as reward money. And you're right. He didn't like the fact that people were saying that about him, but I mean, he was lying. Yeah. And they all were. Now, what I didn't know, Pete, in the book, when you talked about Karen Kelly, I did not realize, because when you hear this story, you don't really hear a lot about her on the side of her turning against him as well. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was odd in the book. I said, what? She was turned on it too?
Yeah, she was one of the first ones. Yeah. Well, you got to understand that she was into drugs, and, you know, I interviewed her when she was in Tutwiler prison, and, you know, she was, and I think she's out now too, but she was someone who was going to save her own skin no matter what. You know, now I'd have to go back and look at my book, but right after the murder, I think she disappeared, and she was making her living in a rather risque way. I
think I remember. It was some type of club type thing. I can't remember what it was, but yeah. I actually spoke to her.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, I actually spoke to her. She inboxed me. Very pleasant.
Yeah,
she was very pleasant, and she's concerned about this as well. And I will say that she wants to see the rightful killer caught as well. I'll just leave it at that with her. But our conversation was pleasant, you know.
Oh, she was pleasant with me too. Yeah. She came across, and she had a good sense of humor, but you know, the thing that always bothered me, and Ralph Myers was very easily confused, was that nobody really was paying attention to the Vicki Pittman murder. And, because she didn't matter. And I think Karen Kelly got convicted on that one, right? I think
I think so. Yeah, she went down for that one.
And I don't, to my mind, and I haven't talked to Vicki Lynn Pittman's aunts, but I'm not sure what happened over there. It's as big a mess as what happened.
I was going to ask and what is it that because you didn't talk about this in the book, I don't think, what it was that they were using, because the leverage they were trying to use to get everybody else to lie. But what did they use for Karen Kelly? What was that bait that they gave her that she had to take? Because she turned on him. And I don't remember reading what they said to her about that. I saw what they said about Myers. You're going to get charged for both of these if you don't do something and negotiate. But what was it with her?
Murder. It was the murder of Vicki Lynn.
It was the murder. Murder.
They, and I can't remember now. I'm so sorry. It's been 17 books ago. But she and Ralph got together at one point. They put them together and they basically said, hey, look, this is our way out. Yeah, but she turned on him. Yep, she sure did.
I just thought, look at the irony. I mean, this is the woman that, it wasn't her fault that he got into this, but you have to know that in those days, and I think it's still true today, that they don't like to see blacks and whites mixing when it comes to relationships. And I don't understand that, because everyone has progressed beyond that in other smaller towns, I think. But for some reason, Monroeville is just stuck.
Yeah, I don't know. Point. I do know that these officers were desperate to find someone.
Yes.
The Morrison case was really a big case. They were under tremendous pressure. 6 months had gone by. Nothing had happened. And when Karen Kelly is over in the other jail and this whole Tyrone Patterson gets involved in it, and she ends up first saying Patterson killed her, and then they end up saying Johnny D, and she's the first one to bring up my boyfriend Johnny D.
Yeah.
As soon as that communication between law enforcement meant that Johnny D was involved in this murder, they hightailed it over there.
Yeah.
They got Ralph, and then they did everything they could to get them shifted over, which is what they did. Ralph Myers basically was coached, and he absorbed what they told him, and boom, that's how they got Johnny D. And he still, what's sad about this is you have to remember, you want to take the legal path, he's found guilty in this trial. Then his appeal goes up. Bryan files his first appeal, and the judges rule against him.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not until they make a mistake. And the mistake is that they turn over to Bryan, exculpatory evidence they have to turn over, and they find that a tape of Myers where they're browbeating him, saying, you did this, here's how, and he's saying, no, was never given to the defense counsel. That's the legal thing that finally forces them. But here's what you have to remember. Even after that's done and Bryan files the right documents, there's no doubt that this guy didn't get a fair trial. They still will not let him out. And again, they have the investigators come in, they have this big meeting, and then they're hiding evidence because they don't want to let him out for political reasons. They don't want to let him out until they find a killer. The ABI agents are saying, well, we got this Denmark character, we can charge him. Then 60 Minutes comes in and blows the thing up even more. And they're going like, oh my gosh. And okay, everybody thinks they're going to charge Demar, and it's a made up name. And then they finally let him out because they're afraid Bryan's going to sue them. So even when they know this guy is innocent,
yes,
they're not going to let him out. It was like mind blowing because they wanted somebody to blame. And meanwhile, Pittman thing is just like, it's just, yeah, there's lots of murders and she didn't
And
count.
that's how the family felt too in the book. I felt for the Pittmans because they felt that all of the focus was on Ronda Morrison, and it almost seemed like Monroeville was using that as leverage.
Yeah.
That was just a leverage. That's something to play with instead of this is someone who was also a teenager that lost her life as well.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. And I think the thing I liked about that was, I didn't like about it, but the thing about Vicki Lynn Pittman was that she was white, but she was poor. And I thought that was an interesting aspect of this story, that it's not, while the majority, my feelings are the majority are targeted black men that and white murders. This was a case where the person was poor and so forth, they didn't matter. It was just, even though they were white, they didn't matter because they were no.
Do you think we've moved from that much? Do you think that, I know in the small town it's true, but look over our country and everything that's been going on. Do you think that's something that we can say for a lot of places, that when you're poor, you're just forgotten?
Well,
black or white.
Yeah, my big thing is people with mental illness. And one of the things that people don't realize is that, and one of the things I'm glad that a lot of the news about people being shot by the police is people don't realize that nearly 40% of all people shot by the police have a mental illness. So, it's African Americans, and it's also people with mental illnesses. And anybody who's on the fringe of society, is at risk sometimes, and that's just not right. But I haven't been down to Monroeville in a long, long time. I hope things have improved down there.
I don't know. You might be in for a surprise. They have a new mayor now, an African American mayor. I think that is something that's awesome, because that's a first. That's a first in history. So whenever we do an event or something, we're going to have to send you an invitation for you to come to Monroeville, and we could just hang out like go buddies and just, go to the courthouse steps and just make some noise.
One of the reasons when I first contacted Bryan Stevenson, I got to be truthful here. One of the reasons I really wanted to do this book was because it was in Monroeville, and it was
a small town.
Well, no, it was To Kill a Mockingbird.
Really?
Yeah, it was the town.
Wow.
Monroeville was the model for To Kill a Mockingbird, and I thought it would be an interesting time capsule to go from Atticus Finch to Bryan Stevenson. What I found interesting, let's look at, has anything changed since those days? What I found interesting was Bryan Stevenson hated, or didn't hate, I don't want to put words in his mouth. He did not think much of To Kill a Mockingbird.
He and I agree.
Because he felt like it was a white man saving a black man. And, it just reiterated the whole, here's the good white guy coming in to save the black guy. Now, what made that interesting was, and I will tell you this, if you look at the cover of my book, this is not a true crime cover. This is a fiction cover. This is the kind of cover you see on novels. This, my friend, is a true crime book. It has inmate, boom, 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 right in the face. Why is that a fiction cover? The publisher didn't want to put pictures of Bryan or anyone else in the book and Johnny D, because they didn't believe that it would sell if people realized right up front that Johnny D was a black man. That people wouldn't read it because they wouldn't care about a black man on death row, and that a black man had saved him. And so I fought hard to get pictures in and the whole 9 yards. But in the end, the publisher had authority over the cover. And so, but this is a fiction cover. You can see, and that's a true crime cover. And I've always thought that was interesting. And I know that's changed, because what was so funny was right after that, well, I'll tell you one more story and then I'll be quiet. I wanted to do when you went into bookstores and you looked at true crime, there were no stories about black people. It was always either a white serial killer, a rich white person, or a horrific murder, but there was nothing about black folks. Now, this was in the 80s, and my publisher said, believe it or not, now this is going to shock you, it said black people don't read books. Well,
no, are you serious?
So, about a year later, Oprah comes on. And Oprah comes on and changes the whole dynamic in publishing. And I mean, that's how blind even the publishing community was about this, you know? So I'm letting loose secrets I shouldn't let loose. But
no, you can let it loose on the Ella Johnson show. Let me ask you a question, because someone asked me one day, they said, was his book rewritten? Was your book rewritten? No?
No.
Okay.
No.
I didn't think so, but I wanted to ask.
Nobody edited it. Nobody saw it. All the interviews were on tapes. And I have a tendency to over-investigate. And, that's what I did. It took 3 years. I really needed a book that made me some money after that because I was losing money. But I just felt the story. And what was interesting was that there was a feeling this book wouldn't sell, and it didn't sell as well as it should have, but it won the Kennedy Award, it won an Edgar Award, and was recognized. And I felt nothing but gratification when, if you read Just Mercy, you'll see that it's the McMillian story, and it just echoes. And Bryan thanks me in the book. He talks about me coming there. But to me, it was a sign of how things had changed. Right. That by the time Bryan's book came out, and of course, Bryan is, I mean, he's so much more glorious than Pete Earley. I mean, my God, the guy's a living saint, my book. But he, times had changed enough that people were really fascinated by the story. And so I was glad that it finally got out. Now what I really appreciate you doing, and then I'll be quiet.
No, it's okay.
We need to get this thing going. We need somebody to investigate it. I'm sorry if this Denmark character's life has been ruined. I apologize, but he deserves the right to be proven innocent or guilty. And whoever did that is still out there. And
That's
one
right.
of the things that the FBI profiler said is this guy worked up to this gradually. Sexual assault, possibly a rape, then an attack and a murder. And they wrote in that report, he will do it again if he isn't caught. So we don't know what happened to this person. And we don't, maybe it's not Denmark or whatever. But whoever it is, there's a chance he might have done it again. And that's why we have to stop this nonsense. And the Morrisons really deserve better.
Now, do you think they'll join in with us on this investigation? I mean, when you do a petition, because this is the first time I've ever done something like this, we do a petition, we get enough signatures, it's going to the Attorney General of Alabama, right? Is that who gets this? Who eventually decides to reopen the investigation?
The Attorney General would be the person to open it, but I don't know. I guess a petition would be the best way to do it, or, online or whatever. But I would think that any Attorney General worth his salt would jump into this. And I'm curious now, with as much time has passed, why they don't want to. And maybe that's the excuse. Well, we can't dig into it, but that's nonsense. They have, you could go back. Who knows if there's evidence on her clothing that
exactly
may have, and I'm not just talking about semen or something like that. I don't know how far that got, but maybe hair, or, you read about cold cases all the time where they go back and they discover this one thing. I mean, Taylor and Cole, I would contact them if they're both, I'm sure they're both retired, but particularly, I think it was Taylor was really bitter that nobody was ever charged with this. And
yeah,
I don't know.
They were not happy that they had to leave. I read that in your book.
I don't know who I don't know who replaced Chapman. And I don't know if that's somebody who really want to get back in this or not. But murder is for life in the sense that you can always dig it back open. You can always go investigate it. And, I see no reason why somebody shouldn't go in. I mean, if someone were killed in Monroeville tomorrow, they would open an investigation and they would move forward with it. Well, somebody was.
That's right.
Ronda Morrison was killed. And what are you doing about it?
What would you say to those people, Pete, who are on the fence? They're just like, listen, just let it die down. We're getting over it. We're trying to grow. We're trying to move past it. What would you say to those people? Because you have those kind watching also. They just want this to go away. Let it go.
What you should do is look right in their eyes and say, if Ronda was your daughter, would you feel that way? If that was your kid who was, shot in the back, had her blouse pushed open by somebody who came in there wanting to rape her, would you just say, let's let sleeping dog lies. It was really sad. Johnny D got out, so no harm. No harm. She's dead. That's harm. This is a young girl and family who was devastated. If you believe in justice, then the killer should be brought to justice, whether he's white, black, green, yellow, blue. And, it's just a part of the story that everybody overlooks. It's like, well, we saved Johnny D. It was an example of how he was framed, etc. But let's move on. Well, no, I agree. It's not right. And if I could, I'd go back and try to do more on it, but I don't think I'd be welcome. I
don't think I'm welcomed either. I think.
All right.
But I just, you know what, Pete, I think I didn't know Johnny D. I didn't know Ronda. And it doesn't matter because I think that this is a great opportunity for the city to heal. And I think they don't understand that yet. And I think that's up to us to let them see it, because when this is solved, now you guys can stop feeling the way you do about Black people, because I know you want us to be guilty. I know you think we fit that description, but not this time. And we need to prove it, because until the killer is caught, Johnny D is not completely exonerated as far as I'm concerned.
Well, I would think the community would be upset about just mercy. It'd be upset about circumstantial evidence and upset about, well, people look at Monroeville. So I would think that they'd want more of the To Kill a Mockingbird image, and they would want...
Ding, ding, ding. You just hit the nail on the head. That's what it is. As long as we're talking about this, it taints the image of To Kill a Mockingbird. Well, I look at it this way, Pete, because in To Kill a Mockingbird, you had a Black man that was accused of something he didn't do, just like Johnny D.
Right.
And in that book, you had a white man who represented him, which I guess is the part we're supposed to like. But when Johnny D was accused of it in real life, he couldn't get a white man to represent him. He couldn't get an Atticus Finch at all.
Yeah.
So my thing is, how are we going to glorify something and give it all this praise if it wouldn't happen? I mean, if you say, Ella, that, yeah, we're going to get a white man that's going to represent Johnny D, and we're going to show you guys we really are the town for To Kill a Mockingbird. But you're fake, because in real life, you won't do that. But we're still praising something. And I'm not trying to put down Harper Lee. I think it's wonderful. But I know I read in your book where you talked about people in Monroeville didn't really like this story at first. They were offended by it. But somewhere along the line, when the money starts rolling and the fame of saying, oh, Monroeville, it changed. And I am with Bryan Stevenson on this one. I'm sorry. I've really tried to embrace it, the story, and I've tried to find a way to make it fit this time. But I keep coming up with a negative view of it because it doesn't fit the time. You don't really have a white man that would represent a Black man. And besides, in the story, he didn't get off. So I don't see where the justice was, But where do we go from here, Pete? What do you want people? What is the main thing that you want people to get from circumstantial evidence?
Well, I think Just Mercy in the film did an excellent job of kind of covering Bryan and what you'll find in circumstantial evidence is the more detailed account, that the blow by blow by blow by blow. And also, I mean, Bryan comes at it as the attorney. I mean, Eichner and Tom Tate and Simon Benson. He saw them as opponents, where in circumstantial evidence, you get the intricate details of what they did, how they thought, what they talked, and everything else. I was kind of surprised at some of the language in my own book and how times have changed. Because if you go back and look, you'll see that several people use the N-word without knowing it's going to be in book, without any kind of qualms about it. And I think that is one thing that has changed. At least when you're talking to an author, you got to be smart enough not to do that.
Yeah, because people try to change it once you interview, because you interviewed everybody that's in this book.
Right.
And did they try to come back and say, I was tripping that day, Pete? Can you not put my part in the book?
But
did you get some of that?
No. If you look at Judge Key, I mean, he was, I think he's quoted in the book talking about how blacks aren't smart enough. Someone needs to be a parent to them and kind of lead them. And that was the judge who heard the case. I mean, people don't recognize their own biases. And I think that comes through when you look at how this, but if you want the deep down details of Just Mercy, you'll find it in that book, not because there's anything wrong with Bryan's book. I mean, it's great, but the Johnny D story is part of his bigger story, and he's an advocate. And this is just a blow by blow by blow by blow by blow account.
Definitely it was blow. I mean, you brought out a lot of facts in this case that I know a lot of people were not aware of. And it made me realize that Monroeville, they went through all of this effort to frame Johnny D. And I think the underlying thing was because he was in a relationship with a married white woman. And you would think that, and I've even heard stories in Monroeville even worse than that, Pete, where they said that sometimes black men that were in relationships with white women, they would just come up missing. And there's so many unsolved murders still in Monroeville. I don't know. Maybe you'll be inspired. I just had Les said, try it, Pete. Go back to Monroeville. Listen, let me tell you, I mean, you're laughing, but I'm serious.
Yeah.
Like, I'm ready.
Not laughing about the murders. It's just that.
No, you're laughing about going to Monroeville.
Yeah.
And I'm serious because I think that your face in the place will let them see that we're serious. Yeah. That here is the author who wrote the story about this book, and he's back. Because we didn't finish. Until the person is brought to justice, we're not done, right?
I think that what we should do is you should send me a list of some of the key players, like who represents that district.
Okay.
And you should try to go through that area, and maybe I can write a letter or send a copy of the book or something to your attorney general or something like that. Or, I have to buy them too, but I'll gladly buy like 5 or 6 copies of the book and mail them to you, and you can send them to people.
I will definitely do that. I will. And I appreciate you for being a part of this and supporting it. Yeah. Because that was the thrill of my life, knowing that you were like, oh my God, I'm so glad you're doing this, because like, this is something that you wanted as well. And I think that, let's look at some of the comments that we have over here. People are just, they're not asking questions. They're just saying, how.
You should, what's going on with the Monroeville paper? Is it?
Oh, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. I had no idea, and you brought this out in the book, that Chap Tate had a very strange relationship with the Monroe Journal. Like, everything he said was printed. Like, you've been in journalism, and I've been in journalism as well. And I know that when you are writing a story, you have to basically tell it like it is. You can't be one-sided. And it seems like every time they did something about the Johnny D, it was one-sided, especially after the 60 Minutes that aired. They went in the paper and it was just like they just went off on 60 Minutes. And I think you brought out the fact that 60 Minutes had to go and tell them, okay, stop it. You guys are lying on us or something like that.
Yeah, I don't remember that. I just know that I grew up in a small town. I was a small town reporter, and you tend to, believe people you live with and people in authority. And so, it's very hard in a small town where you're going to see the sheriff the next day to question him or print something about him. It takes a lot of guts to do that. I have no idea at the Monroeville. I think I talked to one of the people there, quoted them in the book, but I just don't know. I just know it takes a lot of guts in a small town to challenge the district attorney and the sheriff and all that. It's the same kind of dynamic that Tommy Chapman faced with Tate. I mean, these are people he works with every day, and to tell them to say that they screwed up, they did something wrong, either intentionally or not intentionally, and they, have embarrassed everybody because they put an innocent guy on death row. I mean, he may talk to Pete Earley, and Pete Earley leaves town. The next day, he's going to go down to the cafe, and those guys are all going to be sitting there. So
talking about you, but that's okay. We're not afraid of that. But I appreciate your help that you're offering on that. I'll definitely be in touch with that information so we can start the ball rolling right now. I think we're like a little bit less than 500 signed petition, but we're getting ready to do a press release and get it out there so that the masses will know. So that's coming up. But is there anything else you want to say? I know I kept you longer than an hour. I forgot to tell you.
You can even try to contact 60 Minutes again, and say, why don't you come back? And, the murder still. I don't know. Like I said, I tried 2020 and I didn't get anywhere. And I have a lot of connections like that. But I'm all for your petition. I will look it up and sign it. And, I'm happy to write a letter or two and send a couple books your way. So more power to you.
That's right. Well, guys, listen, I did promise that someone would win this book, Circumstantial Evidence. Now, Pete, are you able to see the notes and the messages that people are leaving there? Are you able? You can't see it?
I just saw.
I was going to let you pick the winner, but that way it won't be any pressure on me.
Well, I think you pick Les. He's the one who told you about me.
Yeah, but Les has the book. I want somebody that doesn't have the book. But I am so grateful because Les came onto my show. He's going to be on tomorrow night because we're going to bring people on tomorrow to talk about this show. Okay. And how awesome you are. We're going to talk about you, Pete. You should come back.
I have to watch it because I've often wondered what happened to Minnie and so many of the characters. It's been, more than 30 years, 40 years?
It really has.
So and you develop attachments, people you like down there. And I always liked Minnie McMillian. I thought she was very
sweetheart, strong woman to stand with him.
Yeah,
she really was. Now, who was that? I know I got a couple more things, and we're gonna get out of here because I know you're probably tired. You've had a long day. Right. But what was the most heart-wrenching part of this entire story for you, besides the obvious, Johnny D?
Well, how marginalized the people who lived in Clausel, if I remember correctly, that's what it was called, that community. How it reminds me of people I deal with, mental illness, who are beaten, are in. I spent 10 months in a jail following people with mental illness, and they have no credibility. And you can do anything to them in a jail, and nobody will believe otherwise. And I was just shocked at how Minnie and these other people were just cast aside as just being, nobody believes them. And, I have white privilege. I've always been, the police have always treated me with respect. And to just be so marginalized that you can just be thrown aside when you have like 10, 15, 20 people come forward and say, he was there, I saw him. And they go, oh, yeah, well, you're just a liar. You're just one of those people. I mean, that's wrong. It's just so wrong. And I also had to discover, and this will be one of my last comments, is Bryan Stevenson really opened my eyes to a lot of things because when I first saw that picture of Johnny D, he sent me a picture of Johnny D's mugshot. And I later told Bryan, I said, I'm embarrassed to tell you this, but when I saw his mugshot, I thought, wow, that guy looks guilty.
I've never seen his mugshot.
Did
he look guilty? Why? But why would you say? Oh, it's in the book.
Yeah.
Oh, I want to see it. You have to show. Oh, wow.
I thought, wow, that guy looks like, I'd seen a lot of criminals. I thought, God, that guy looks like a criminal. And I realized that was all my prejudice coming through that I didn't even see, and Bryan Stevenson, I said to Bryan, I said, well, gosh, when I first saw that, I thought he looked guilty. He looks like a criminal. And Bryan said, he looks to me like my brother, or he looks to me like my father, or he looks to me. And I went, whoa, wow, that's interesting. But that was.
I'm glad you admitted that.
I'd grown up in Lily White, Colorado. I'd never really been down in the South. I hadn't seen a lot, even though I worked in the district staff. And it was just interesting to me to see the poverty in the 80s and see how there was, the interaction between whites and blacks. Like I said, when I did that, I can't remember which fast food restaurant was for blacks and one was for white. It was just foreign to me. So anyway, hopefully that's all changed.
Yeah, let's hopefully. There's one more thing I at the end of the book, in the end of your book, you talked about how Stevenson wanted Johnny D to be put back into society. He wanted the society that did this to him, the system that did this to him, to right the wrong by I think letting a judge in Monroe County sign for him to be released or something, and no one would do it.
Yeah.
Talk to us about that before we get out of here.
I tend to remember that he had been arrested in a different county, and so that's where they wanted to do it. And he said, no, we're doing this in Monroeville, and if you don't, we'll have 60 people protesting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and forced them to release him there, if I remember correctly. But to the best of my knowledge, Johnny D never got a cent of compensation. There was a bill that was introduced, and Alabama never paid him a cent. And I think he moved.
So he never got paid?
I don't think so. Not to my knowledge, he never did. I signed a movie deal, and it never got made, but all that money went to him. But it wasn't, it was like, I don't know.
Wow. Wait a minute.
$15.
Oh, because I thought I read somewhere where there was an out-of-court settlement.
Well, there might have been that I don't know about. But I thought they put a bill up before the legislature. Last time I checked, they put a bill up before the legislature, and they turned it down.
Yeah, I think it's like $7.2 million. And that was definitely, but I thought that at the end they said an out-of-court. That is really sad if he did not get compensation.
I don't know. Yeah,
and it's even sadder that they didn't say, I'm sorry, Pete. Yeah.
You'd have to. I don't know about that.
Do you think they should? Do you think they should apologize publicly to him and his family, even after all these years?
Yeah, I do. I think that I don't know who's still alive down there, but
Tom Tate is the only one. Benson is gone. I think Eichner is as well, and Chapman is as well.
I think Sheriff Tate would be not interested in apologizing the last time I talked to him.
Should we go after him, or can we?
I don't know. I have no idea what's happened to him, or he's in my book, and that's all I can say.
That's all you can say. Yeah. Well, is there anything else you want to say before we get out of here, Pete? I've enjoyed you.
I'm glad you're doing your program. It was a delight meeting you. I'm glad that somebody finally got interested in this, and I will try to help you with my limited ways, and I hope somebody can go down. And it's also not fair. I mean, my book makes a pretty strong case that Howard DeMar, it's a made-up name, was the one who did this. And if he is innocent, I'd like to see that proven too.
And if he isn't, we'd like to see that also proven.
I would.
We want somebody to go to. I think everybody can rest. We know the truth.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, I know that you guys have enjoyed Pete, and if you want to be a part of the broadcast tomorrow, part of the reaction show to this, hit me up. You know, we have a few people already, but if you would like to join, you're more than welcome to do so. You're welcome to come back as well. You know, you're always welcome here. So if you want to come back tomorrow, just hit me up and I'll send you the link, because there's a new link.
Thanks
But I want to thank all of you so much for tuning in to the Ella Johnson Show. We'll be here again tomorrow, right here on Facebook and YouTube Live at 8 p.m. Eastern. We'll see ya. Good night.
Bye.
Good night.
Thanks for tuning in to the Ella Johnson Show.